Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for today's webinar all about Mapbox geocoding and specifically using it for asset tracking use cases. We're just going to go over a little bit of housekeeping and how to participate before we kick things off. So let me just move to the next slide here. So in terms of how to participate, so we are using Zoom for today's session. There are captions available in different languages. If that is helpful for you, please go down into the captions and translation setting to turn that on. You also have access to the webinar chat feature. Please use that to share links or comments with other participants. For Q&A, when submitting questions to our presenters, please use the separate Q&A feature in Zoom. It's a separate window that lets us keep track of the questions that are submitted so we don't miss them in the chat. That's basically it for Zoom. The other main thing to know is this session is being recorded today, and so you will be sent a recording of it via email. Everyone who has registered will get a link to that. All right. So let's move ahead here. So today's presenters, we have Robert Florence, who's product manager with the geocoding team at Mapbox, and Chris Wong, who is our head of developer resources. And today's session is all about geocoding. So I'm going to hand things over. Oh, actually, first the agenda for today. So we're going to start with Mapbox geocoding in the context of asset tracking, talk a little bit about how reverse geocoding actually works and why the choice of precision level matters in particular for asset tracking use cases. And then we'll switch over to Chris for a live demo of using the reverse geocoding of the Mapbox API in action. We will reserve time for Q&A at the end as well. You're welcome to submit questions at any point through the webinar in the Q&A feature, and then we'll look at them all together at the end of the session. All right, without further ado, over to you, Robert. And let's make sure that you are, there we go, unmuted.
Right. Thank you, Marina. Everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Cool. Okay. Thanks everyone for joining today. I'm Robert. I'm the PM for geocoding, which is one of our search products here at Mapbox. On the search teams, we are focused on providing really wide coverage, high precision, high throughput, reliable APIs. Our geocoding product at Mapbox serves billions of geocoding requests across the world every day with a sub 70-second P99 latency. And today we're going to kind of explore reverse geocoding, different levels of precision that you can get back from Mapbox APIs, and basically how people can ship a lot faster with Mapbox. And as we're going, please throw any questions in the chat and I'll try to answer them live if relevant as well. Lost my, here we go. So most of you, I'm assuming, are probably familiar somewhat with geocoding, but just a really quick recap. There's forward and reverse geocoding. Forward is really like optimizing searching for places. You know, you're going from an address or a POI name or a zip code string, and then you want to find the location of that address or the center of that zip code, etc. And for reverse, it's the opposite. You're moving from a coordinate that's coming off of like an ELD or an IoT device, and you just want to make this something that's analyzable, human understandable. So as devices stream coordinates, you're not just looking at, your managers aren't necessarily just looking at like raw lat longs trying to figure out what they mean, but they're kind of human readable and analyzable. So I want to talk about a few of the really high value use cases we see in this industry around reverse geocoding. So first is the live and historical understanding of your fleet. This is pretty much the main use case that we see around reverse geocoding, where Mapbox's precision delivers a lot of value. So what you're able to do with reverse geocoding is you can basically tag every ping that you're getting off of the devices on your assets. You can tag them with the house number and street, tag them with the city and zip code, and then you can show that in a real-time dashboard. You can have it in historical analysis. And what we see mostly is that you're reverse geocoding the start and end points of the route so that you can determine like, well, where was this asset at a particular time. Where did it start? Where did it end? Also, reverse geocoding waypoints along the way, like when you detect dwell points of a certain asset, where was that? So that you're not just looking at a lat long, you're looking at something like, oh, it was in this zip code or it was by this address. This allows for quick analysis of where important events with your assets have actually happened. And connected to this is the exception and incident reporting. So anytime there's a deviation from the route or any atypical event is detected, a reverse geocode will enable you to know like where that actually happened and contextualize it. It allows you to do things like auto-populate the location in a ticket, which can cut down a lot on the CSR's handling of driver calls. Mapbox offers something kind of unique for these use cases, which is permanent geocoding. So especially if you're doing kind of historical understanding or audits after the fact, our permanent geocoding SKU, which is very easy to enable, you just set a parameter permanent equals true in your API request. That'll give you the ability to, you can't, not only can you cache it for like 30 days, which other providers provide, but you can cache it indefinitely. So if you need to do end of the year reporting or something like that, it's quite valuable to use our permanent geocoding. The other valuable use cases that people are using reverse geocoding and Mapbox for are, one is geofencing and dynamic location notification. So anytime an asset enters like a particular geofence, you can record the point of entry or the dwell point within that geofence. Then there's behavior and safety monitoring. Some of our customers do things like they join these pings from the IoT devices on their assets to things like speed limits, school zones, where harsh braking might have happened, especially like in populated areas. And this reverse geocode will allow you to contextualize any sort of unsafe behavior with a real world location. And then finally, security management. If you're tracking to make sure assets stay inside of like an approved corridor, like for their route, reverse geocoding can help because whenever there is a deviation, you can get an alert that just shows you actually where it happened, like what street were they on, what address were they near, what city were they in. It can give a lot of context. And just on the geofencing and dynamic locations and notifications in particular, forward geocoding also comes into play. A lot of our asset tracking customers who have a sort of an admin dashboard for a fleet manager, one of the common features in there is creating geofences or creating areas where they want to get a dynamic notification of like, hey, whenever one of our assets passes through this area, we'd like to get a notification. And just the user experience of making that very easy, you can put forward geocoding into your dashboard that allows just someone to like search for an address or a location and then dynamically create a geofence within the dashboard. So the other thing I'll mention here, and we'll cover it later, but batch geocoding is also an important feature that a lot of these customers of our asset tracking customers use, because what batch geocoding does is instead of sending us a query every time you have an event from one of your assets or devices, you can kind of store up lat long pings in your database, and then whenever you actually need to do the analysis, you can send us batches and combine up to 1,000 queries in a single API request. And that reduces a lot of the overhead and improves the performance for our customers. So with Mapbox, we offer like a very high level of precision, and precision matters a lot for asset tracking for our customers because it's really important that they know, their customers know exactly where an asset started and ended their trip, any waypoints or deviations they took along the way. Mapbox invests a lot in data sourcing. So we have thousands of different open source data sources. We privately license many different data sources. Plus, we have over 100 million active users that we're gathering telemetry from, and also submit contributions to us, such as, when a customer might say like, hey, actually, like the location of my address is, 10 meters this way or that way. We process all this data and end up with an index of addresses worldwide that is highly precise and improves over time. So one of the things that Chris will show you later in this is that what we do is for any of these address points you see here, we provide the full geographical context in a single API response. So you can kind of choose what level you're tracking at. Sometimes it's really important to have the address level geocode, but other times when you're just along a highway or something like this, just getting back a street level result is what you need. So to cover a little bit so these are a couple of our marquee customers in the industry today that do a lot of traffic with Mapbox. And they both leverage permanent geocoding, which we discussed a couple slides ago a bit. This is a unique Mapbox feature again. Carrier's temperature controlled transport and Pedigree's OneView solution. They both use permanent geocoding to enable that historical analysis and the record keeping. And so when you use permanent geocoding, what that really means is that you are allowed to store those results indefinitely. So if you're doing any audit trail work, or for example, if you're trying to do like a machine learning based tool for like routing, for example, or distribution, you're allowed to actually keep all of our results and, for example, train a model based on our geocoding results and store them indefinitely for any reporting purposes. So in other cases where you might only have 30 days to cache or you have no caching, you'd have to make requests to these APIs every single time you wanted to, for example, show someone, a manager, like, well, where did something happen? Or when you wanted to do a reporting at the end of the year, you'd have to call again to an API to get the address or location at that coordinate. But with Mapbox permanent geocoding, this allows these customers to just make the call one time and it's over. There are other ways to optimize that we can get into, especially in the demo part, but some examples are if you're not interested in permanent geocoding, some of the things you can do with Mapbox geocoding are if you have a dashboard and you're displaying a history of locations like start and end locations or incident locations, what you can do is just keep the lat long in your dashboard and then dynamically geocode against us on temp geocoding. So whenever a manager is actually interested in like, hey, what happened here? Rather than just geocoding everything in your database against us, only geocode the ones that someone is actually indicating interest in the UX. So there are a lot of geocoding vendors out there. The key considerations that we work with our potential customers on are one is accuracy and coverage. Like, you know, a lot of geocoding providers out there, they're only using open source data, for example. They're going to have limited coverage. Their accuracy will be kind of all over the place. Precision as well, whether you're getting rooftops back or you're typically only getting street level or partial level. This is very important. In terms of the reliability and scalability, can it actually handle your scale? Because, we have customers that are doing have rate limits that are in the hundreds of thousands per minute. And so you have to understand whether, given your volume, is that provider able to support you? And then definitely the licensing, customization, flexibility. Are you able to store the results that come back from this geocoding provider? Are you able to use them freely on any map? Like if you have like geocodes from provider A, but your dashboard uses a map from provider B, are you allowed to use those together? And then the last is kind of the maintenance and engineering investment. Like if you're rolling your own geocoder with Peleus or something like that based on OSM data, like, estimating the cost of upkeep of that solution, making sure that you have the latest data in there, and including when you expand to other countries, making sure that engine actually supports querying addresses in that country. These are kind of the important considerations that we see with customers. And when it comes to choosing Mapbox, in terms of our accuracy and coverage, we have 700 million addresses worldwide. We have 150 million addresses in the US. And in the US in particular, 70% of those are rooftop addresses. So that's the highest level of precision that you can get from a geocoder. That means that the address that we found for you actually intersects the center of the building with that same address. So it's not just kind of a random point that might be nearby or in the area, but we guarantee that it is right in the center of the building of that address. Reliability and scale here. again, we are processing billions of requests every day, reverse geocoding in particular. And we have a sub 70-second P99 latency, and we support very high rate limits. Again, we have customers that are in the hundreds of thousands per minute. Cost efficient volume tiers are also really important. We have very affordable pricing. Like you'll see that our starting rates are extremely competitive just on our website. But if you're doing really high volumes, our sales team and I can work with you to get access to volume tiers, which can make doing large amounts of asset tracking very affordable with Mapbox. And then permanent storage, licensing is really important. One of the big reasons people choose Mapbox a lot of the time is because we allow permanent, indefinite storage of results that you get back from our API if you set the parameter permanent to true. And then the easy setup and integration. We have customers that get set up in a day. We don't have a very complex API schema. We just have a single shot API request. And in that response, we include all the information. Like we'll include all the nearby addresses with the actual location and all the other metadata. You don't have to do any secondary call with our API. We did a customer survey a bit earlier this year. This was some of the feedback we got from that survey. Really cost effective, very good documentation, great coverage, really good performance. And in particular, what our biggest piece of feedback from that survey was that the developer experience implementing Mapbox is really good. We have great documentation, great playgrounds, plus we have SDKs that make it really easy to just get this integrated into like an admin dashboard very quickly. And so I would like to show you all a little bit about exactly how easy this is and how it works. So I'm going to hand it over to Chris Wong.
All right, thanks, Robert. And my name is Chris Wong. I'm head of developer resources here at Mapbox. It means it's my job to make sure that across our entire suite of products, developers at companies large and small, independent developers, anybody who wants to build something with Mapbox has the resources that they need to do so. So today I'm going to show you a few different things. We're going to start with the documentation. So you saw some comments earlier from customers about how we have great API documentation. So check out our documentation site for all products. But if you end up on the API docs, which is docs.mapbox.com/API, you'll see all the different APIs we offer. And then they're split up by maps, navigation, and search. These are kind of our main product areas. So within search, you will find the geocoding API documentation, which is what I'm looking at here. And this is kind of your source of truth for, shouldn't say kind of, this is your source of truth for everything you can do with the geocoding API. So we talk about geographic feature types here, but if we skip down to a forward geocoding request, here's your API template. Like Robert said, it's one call. So you just need to sort of learn the language for how you add query parameters to this API call in order to do forward geocoding. Same thing for reverse geocoding. If we come down here, URL looks similar at the beginning, but you just need to pass in longitude and latitude as query parameters, and you can get back a reverse geocoding response. So the full response is also documented here. So as Robert said, there's a whole lot in the response object. So this is where you need to come to find out what all these different values really mean so you can interpret them correctly and use them in whatever your application is doing. So that's the docs, which are extensive and useful, but maybe not as exciting. So I'm going to move over to the playground. So our playgrounds are the way that we can have a graphical interface for you to learn as much as possible about how to get started and make use of our APIs. So I'm going to show this in full screen. So this is our geocoding playground. So we've added a map here, which is great, and you can actually start typing in this search box. So it's very similar to a search UI that you might actually put into an application. So if I search for 120B, for example, it's going to give me back matches that match 120B. So I see a 120 Bank Street, I see a 120 Barrow Street, I want to see a 120 Bleecker Street. These are all in New York. And the reason these are all clustered here is because we actually have proximity set by default. In most geocoding use cases, you don't want to search the entire planet. You want to search within a certain area. So as long as you have a rough coordinate, you can get back more relevant results. If I were to, for example, take this proximity marker and drop it over into Philadelphia, it's going to generate another request to the geocoding API, and you'll see we get back 5 different addresses that start with 120B. If you scroll down over here on the left side, you'll see all the different parameters. So for example, the proximity parameter that we just set is specified here as a coordinate. So as I move this marker around, it's actually just changing the values in here. Let's try it again. You can see it change in real time. So our latitude and longitude just changed here. Same results because I didn't move it very far, but let's move it like outside of Philadelphia and see what we get back. So you can see the latitude and longitude changed. You can also choose different languages. So a lot of times like a town name or a state name or something like that will come back in a different language. So you can choose from all the different languages here. We can also filter for types. So if, for example, I was searching for BR Broomall. Okay, yeah. So I searched for BRO without a number in front of it. So I'm getting back a bunch of different towns. So let's see if I filter this for address. I'm not getting anything because I didn't start with a number. But let's search for 120B again, and we get back only addresses. So there's lots of different types in here, like streets, neighborhoods, postcodes. You can actually check all these out and filter the results that you're getting exactly how you want them. So I would invite you to check out the playground and explore all the different options here. So we try to give you as much as possible. One more I want to highlight before I move over to the request is the bounding box. So just like we have proximity, which is going to give you results that are near a certain area, we also have a bounding box feature where you can actually limit results to a specific area. So nothing outside of this area will get returned. So if I set a bounding box, even though my proximity is way down in Pennsylvania, the closest results that match my query are now in the southwest corner of this box. And again, if I go over here to the left sidebar, you'll see that the bbox parameter has now been filled out or is now enabled, and the corners of this bounding box, or sorry, not the corners, but the limits of this bounding box have been filled in. So these are all becoming API parameters. So let's direct our attention. So anyway, the map is a great way to kind of visualize what you're getting back from this API. Otherwise, you'd just be looking through JSON all day, which is not very human parsable. So if you bring your attention over here to the right side, you'll see that as I interact, so let's do a search for a zip code. So I'll do 20902. Oops, I'm not getting back zip codes because I have a bounding box set. So let's clear that bounding box. So 20902 is a zip code in Silver Spring, Maryland, near where I grew up. And as we make changes, you'll see that you're getting a full request URL right here that you can just copy. So I can now take this URL. The only thing I would need to do is change out this placeholder for my Mapbox access token with the access token that's in my Mapbox account. So very easy to get a hold of that. And yeah, you can actually just copy and paste right from here. So as you interact with the playground, this API call will reflect the data that's currently shown in the playground. And then if you go down below that, you get the full response. So you can explore this and see that you get back a GeoJSON geometry. So it's already in GeoJSON format. You can actually throw a marker on a map very easily if you're using Mapbox tooling for that. But all the goodies are down here in properties. So if we explore this a little bit, we've got a Mapbox ID. We've got a feature type. So this one is a postcode versus an address or versus a street. We've got a full address. We've got a name preferred. And if we look inside coordinates, I'm sorry, not in coordinates, inside of context, I think. Maybe Robert.
What you looking for? Which one are you looking for?
I think we were looking for like rooftop accuracy versus. I need to search for an address, right?
Yeah. Let's pull up an address, and then what you'll see is right on the right hand side in the coordinates object. If you scroll a little bit down right there, you'll see we provide an accuracy point. And rooftop here is what I was mentioning earlier. This is like our highest level of accuracy. And then in our documentation, you'll find the other levels of accuracy, which include whether we haven't necessarily intersected a rooftop, but we've intersected a parcel, like the ownership boundary, or in another case that we might just provide something called a point. Or a fourth option is if we are very confident about the addresses in that area, but might have a small gap, we'll interpolate an address. So for example, if we know where 13 Main Street is, we know where 17 Main Street is, we probably know where 15 Main Street is.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And so what I'm showing here on the right side is that we've got all the goodies in terms of the entire hierarchy of where this address is. So at the top, we have address, which I didn't unwrap here, but we also have the street. So there's a Mapbox ID associated with that. We've got the postal code. We've got the place, which is the city name. We've got a district here, which is the county. We've got a region, which will end up being the state in the United States, which is New Jersey. And then we've got the country. So for any geocoding response, you get the full context of all the kind of administrative areas that it falls under. The other thing I'll show in the playground is reverse geocoding. So instead of searching for an address, we just need a point coordinate. So actually you can click anywhere on the map. I'm just going to click someplace in view here, nowhere in particular, in Pennsylvania. And you'll see the response I get back not only has the coordinate that I clicked on, which is showing up as the first response, but it actually has full context as well. So it's giving me back a county, a nearby a city that this point is in, all the way up to United States and Pennsylvania. So I probably only want the first feature, and I can actually reduce that limit if I wanted to. But you do get back multiple responses just for a single point because we're giving you back the full context. And then same thing applies. I can just limit this to address, and I only get back that address. So there should only be one item in my response. So you can keep clicking around the map if you want to try different reverse geocodes. And again, every time this happens, the request URL will get updated and the response is easily explorable, and you can also copy and paste it. Another fun thing, if you click this little open a new tab button here, it'll actually call that API, make the same API request in a new tab, so you can actually just check it out and explore the response outside of the playground. Okay, so that's our playground. Anyway, most people who are developing or building or even just getting familiar with the geocoding API are going to come here and tinker around, search for places that are nearby that they're familiar with, make sure they're getting back reliable responses. Yes.
Can I mention one more thing before we move on? On the right-hand side there, you'll see the ID right below the type. I just wanted to mention, like, we've been talking a little bit about perm and temporary geocoding, and with perm you can store everything in this API response that Chris is showing you. With temporary, what you can do if you want to like kind of save money and do the thing I was mentioning earlier about just geocoding only when necessary, what you can do with our temporary geocoding is you can always store that ID. So that ID can be indefinitely stored, and then it is kind of like frozen in place. If you ever need to retrieve that exact result again, you can just copy paste that ID into a forward geocoding request and retrieve the feature again. Sorry, Chris. Thank you.
No worries at all. Thank you for sharing that important tidbit. Okay, so that's our playground. Again, check those out, and then also check out the other playgrounds. So almost all of our web services APIs that return data will have a playground, and they're a really great way to get familiar with Mapbox tools. We actually have a couple more coming for the navigation side, like in the next couple of weeks, which are very exciting. Okay, so here's our response. Next, I want to show you a little app that we built, or demo app that we built just to show off the logistics use case. So here we have a little truck that's based in Los Angeles, and what we're going to do is drive the truck around. Every time I drop the pin, we're actually going to make a reverse geocoding API call. So we don't know, basically we're simulating the GPS tracker on this truck. So as long as we have those coordinates, latitude and longitude, that's all we need. And we can fire that off and do a reverse geocode. And for example, let's move to Los Angeles, or let's move from Los Angeles to Las Vegas, and we'll drop it. So you can see a couple things updated here. So on the right, we've got a simulated consumer app for somebody who's tracking a package. So we gave them a rough geocode of where their package is. So we just said Las Vegas, Nevada. We also gave them a static map image. So this is not related to geocoding, but we can show that on a static map with using very little resources, actually give them a visual indicator of where this truck is. But also down here, we've got an admin panel. So we started out with a original address over here in Long Beach, California, and now we can see that we're in Las Vegas. So most of the stuff in here is fictitious, but this location actually did come from the Mapbox Geocoding API. So I'm gonna actually open my dev console so you can actually see the requests, and then I'm gonna move the truck a few more times. So let's drive up through Utah, and there's my call to the Mapbox Geocoding API, so you can see it right here. Those are the coordinates that we pulled off the map, and as I keep going eastward, let me close that. You can see we're adding to this admin table. The consumer app is getting updated. We're going to drive through Missouri, drive through St. Louis. And so every time we drop this, we're just making a call. You could be making continuous calls as the truck moves if you want to keep reasonable breadcrumbs. But we're going to move this delivery all the way across the country up to the East Coast and into New York. We put this together pretty quickly. Hopefully, I think one of my colleagues will drop the link and you can play around with it yourself. But it's also open source, so you can actually go check out the source code and see how we built this. A couple more Mapbox products went into this. Obviously, Mapbox GLJS, which is the map renderer that you are interacting with here. But we're also calling the directions API in order to get back a route to show between each of these waypoints. So whenever I drop this truck pin, I'm actually making two calls to Mapbox, one for the geocoding API to get the reverse geocode, so we can get the location of the pin in a human readable text, and then the other one to the directions API so we can update this map with like a reasonable path that would have been taken between these two locations. I'll show very quickly some code, just as we can drive the point home a little bit about integration here. This is a React app. It was built with Vite and React. I have a use effect here that's actually gathering the point that the truck was dropped in, and then we take those coordinates and drop them into these API call templates and do a fetch. So like we showed in the playground, all we need is those coordinates. So here's the longitude, here's the latitude in a geocoding API call, and then all we need to do is add the Mapbox access token, and we'll get back that response, and we can use that in various places in the user interface. So go ahead and check that out if you really want to know how we built it. The full demo is open source, and you can take a look. Lastly, I'll show Mapbox GL Geocoder. So a lot of times, even if you're separately from your asset tracking pipeline, you might just need a geocoding UI for people to quickly find places on a map if you have a lot of data on a map somewhere. So Mapbox GL Geocoder is a plugin for Mapbox GLJS, which calls the geocoding API behind the scenes, but alleviates from you the need to build out API calls and to build out the UI. So with a few lines of code, as long as you include the dependency and then add 5 lines of JavaScript like this, you get this instant search box. And for example, I'll do the same search I was doing before, 120 Broadway. And of course, I have no proximity set here. So let's see if we can hone in on New York. New York. Guess there's a lot of 120 Broadways. Okay, this is the one I was looking for. When I click on it, it'll actually take control of the map, add a marker on my behalf, add an instant marker, and then fly the map to that location. So you get this kind of full interaction for search, and this is all powered by the geocoding API. Just like we saw when we were interacting with the API directly, you have lots of different parameters you can pass in. So you can do all the same parameters here. We can set proximity, we can set a bounding box, we can limit the types that get the types of responses we get. So that's Mapbox GL Geocoder if you want like a very simple geocoding interface for a mapping application. You can also just add it as a text box without a map if you want to add that to another app, but it makes it much more simple for you. So I think that's all I've got. So I think we're going to turn it back over to, well, I don't know if, we're going to do some Q&A now. So hopefully.
Yes, let's do some Q&A. We've got some good questions that came to us through the chat.
All right, let's see what we've got here. So yes, reminder to everyone who's watching, if you do have a question for Robert or Chris, please submit it in the Q&A box. And we're going to just start working through our live questions. Okay, so we've got a first one here saying, where is the geocoding occurring, especially the permanent type? Where does the data or information get stored with permanent geocoding? Is it only a storage optimization?
Great question. So both whatever type of geocoding you use with Mapbox, whether you use the temporary geocoding, which is the default, or if you set in the URL permanent equals true, in either case, you're making a call to our external API that lives in AWS basically, and we will return that API response to you, and then how you decide to store it is totally up to you. We have a lot of customers that just directly dump these in a SQL database for later analysis. There's no limitation on how you store it at all. So the data that builds our geocoder is inflated from many different thousands of sources. We build an index. The API exposes that index. You call it with your lat long. We return you a response, and then at that point, you can just store it however you would like to.
I think, yeah,
Please send a,
to
yeah.
answer the second part of that question, it's not really a storage optimization. It's purely a permission and licensing thing. So you have permission to store it indefinitely, which you don't if you don't say that you want to do permanent geocoding.
Yeah, so like if you want to run a report on like what has happened with like incidents over the last year, or like where your primary like destinations were over the last year, if you've permanently stored our results, you don't have to like go call the API again. Especially if you're going to run that report like multiple times, it's way better to just call our permanent geocoding API, store it, and then you don't have to call the API anymore.
Great, thanks. While we're on the topic of temporary versus permanent, we have another question here. Bear with me, it's a longer one. It gives a little bit of context. So this person's saying, our app has a user community of about 100,000 people. Users' apps automatically send their location coordinates once an hour. We need to convert the coordinates to city name, not more precise than that, so that other users can see who is in the same city. Is it best for us to use permanent geocoding in order to save the city name? Or since we only need to save it for an hour at a time, is it okay for us to use the temporary geocoding?
Yeah, that's a great one to maybe connect with me on. I would say that, yeah, if you're just storing like the city for an hour, it's probably more effective to use temporary geocoding. But our terms are relatively strict on like caching. Like, the temporary geocoding API is primarily meant for like just, okay, I'm showing something on a dashboard one time, or I'm navigating to a certain location and I just need to trigger the navigation and kind of like end the workflow there. So typically any amount of caching is a permanent geo workflow, but that's something that like, depending on your scale, we can work with you on, come up with like a solution that both is cost effective for you and kind of, works for our upstream licensing terms. But typically, any amount of caching requires the permanent endpoint.
All right. Great, let's move on. We've got a question from Wes asking, does your API provide footprint 2D data for building structures?
That's a great question. I want that. That is high on my list for a priority roadmap item next year. We don't do that today. Some of the big things, the big thing that we're adding this year, we didn't really talk about it in the webinar, but our target is to add building entrances. So that at a certain address, especially like if it's a large apartment building or POI, the driver knows like where the actual door is that they would go to drop off that package or to deliver a parcel. So that's like the next sort of new piece of data that we're going to be introducing in the geocoding API. Building polygons, it's very high on our priority list for next year, but no, we don't do it today. I would love to hear more about your use case. However, if you could drop a note in the chat, it would help me. Yeah, because I would love to add that.
All right, yeah, Wes, let us know more and maybe we'll follow up with you too to learn more about your use case. Now we've got two questions here about outdoor POIs. Maybe we'll ask them both at the same time for you, Robert. How comprehensive is Mapbox coverage for outdoor POI types, especially for niche ones like climbing areas or specific water sport launch points globally? And then the follow-up is, how can we efficiently query for POIs, outdoor activities like hiking, water sports, within specific radii around specific locations, such as 2 kilometers for walking or 5 kilometers for a short drive?
Yeah, so this just first note is that POI results are not able to be returned by the geocoding API in particular, but we do have a really strong kind of flagship, has everything search API called Search Box API. If you just search on Will Search Box API, it'll come up Box API, and that API has everything that geocoding has, which we talked about today, but it also has all this POI data. I can't speak exactly to like I don't have a quantitative answer to the coverage of outdoor POI. However, I know that one of our biggest users of this relative new API is like a micromobility company that does a lot of has a lot of like outdoor destinations that people go to. And we've done evaluations where we went head to head against other top competitors you know about, and we placed the highest and were selected based on our coverage of POI. So that's kind of just overall though, that's like including restaurants and gas stations and everything. I think we could probably easily follow up with you about like, the outdoor POI coverage in particular. I would say it's probably very good, but I don't have an exact answer there. And keep in mind, you will need to use the Searchbox API in order to get access to the POI data. And what was the second part of this question?
Oh, it was about how to efficiently query for POIs within a
Yeah.
specific radius.
So in our documentation for the Searchbox API, there is documentation about a parameter called, I believe it's called category filtering. And there are categories that you'll be able to scope out those outdoor POI to, and then you'll be able to like limit any results coming back from Mapbox to those specific categories. Yeah.
Great. We actually had another question asking about Searchbox. Someone who is familiar with it, asking if there's any other guidance about when or why should one use the geocoding API versus the Searchbox API. Is there anything you'd add other than the POI data?
Yeah, I would say geocoding is just at a much more is at a more affordable price point than Searchbox on just a per request level. And then the second thing is that there's a permanent storage option for geocoding. So those are kind of the two differences. Like one, geocoding is less expensive. Two, there's a permanent storage option. Typically with Searchbox API, we see like more kind of interactive use cases, like people doing rideshare, looking for transportation to go to an event or a restaurant. On the geocoding end of things, it's a lot more like back-end processing of like a bunch of places you need to go deliver to, or like we talked about today, a bunch of like lat longs that you need to make human readable and analyzable. So yeah, if your need is limited to just addresses and zip codes and cities and stuff like that, geocoding is a more kind of affordable option, basically. Also allows you permanent storage. But if you want to be able to get back like the closest McDonald's to that lat long, not just the closest address, Searchbox API is you'll have to use Searchbox API. Yeah.
I'll throw out too, as the name suggests, Searchbox API is meant to power Searchbox in a user interface. So like Robert said, it's more interactive. I did see a question about SDKs, but we do have SDKs that directly talk to the Searchbox API and will provide user interface for you, so they can do the call and show an interactable user interface. We also have SDKs or wrappers for the geocoding API. For various different languages, so like Java, Python, JavaScript, etc. And for the most part, they are just wrappers. So I'm just answering two questions with one, Marina.
Gotcha. Great. Okay, thank you. We have a question that I think might have been covered during the presentation, but just in case anyone missed it, let's ask it just to be sure. The question is, how are multiple addresses for the same lat long resolved?
That's a good question. So in forward geocoding, like when you're going from an address string to a location, the way we do that is just through unit level geocoding. So, if 123 Main Street has like a bunch of different discrete delivery locations there for people's different apartments or business suites, you can just type in like suite 3 or unit 2. And if it's the same location as just the overall 123 Main Street, it will just inherit that location. If it's a unique location, like for unit 2, like it's in a slightly separate building, we'll give you the coordinate for where that is. In the reverse case, where you're working from a lat long, in the reverse case, we don't return any secondary information. Like if 123 Main Street is the closest address to your lat long that you sent us, we'll just give you back 123 Main Street, because what we've seen is that the quality of GPS coordinates needs to be really high to confidently tell you like, oh, you're at 123 Main Street and it's unit 1. And a lot of times things are stacked vertically. And so on the reverse geocoding case, we don't provide any secondary address information. With the POI side, there is kind of a hierarchical relationship between like parent POI and children POI. For example, like there's, you know, Broadway Mall, and then inside Broadway Mall, there's like Annie's Pretzels and Zoomies, and like there's that connection between them. But on the address geocoding side, we only have like the secondary address to address relationship, and in reverse geocoding, we will just pick the closest parent address to your submitted coordinate. I'd love to know more, like if that is something that your use case really needs, like, hey, when we send a reverse geocode, we need to not just get back the parent address, but we need actually the list of all other addresses within it. That's very interesting to us. It's not one I've heard yet, but I would love to know more about it.
Great. All right, we have a question from Neil asking, will this demo cover situations where you're storing and analyzing location data at scale? For example, do you have any products that you offer where we can stream location data, like 30-second tracking data from a vehicle, to query later?
Yes. Chris, do you want to take this, or do you want you?
I mean, as far as I can understand the question, I guess a stream of data, if you're talking about just discrete points, we don't offer anything that would accept that so that you can query it later. If you're storing it on your own somewhere and just want to, you know, do a bunch of geocodes at the end, or do a batch geocode, once you've reached a certain state, you can totally do that using the same processes we showed. But it's nothing, you know, it's not a special process. It would just be if you store 30 locations from a vehicle, you can then do 30 API calls or a batch API call to the geocoding API to get back those geocodes.
Yeah, we don't really offer storage itself, but like we support really high rate limits and throughput on the API. So like you can stream a large volume of coordinates to us, and just when you get the API response back, just store it. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Great. Okay. I'm continuing to focus mostly on the geocoding related questions, but we do have a couple about maps and the mobile SDKs. Maybe Chris, if you're able to hop in to answer some of those. But for now, let's ask this next one. What are the most important parts of the API response in order to determine the quality of the Mapbox result?
Yeah, so the key thing that you want to look for when you get back a result from Mapbox is we covered it just briefly earlier when Chris was demoing the playground, but when you get back that coordinate in the API response, there's an accuracy property, and that accuracy property can be a rooftop, a parcel, a point, or an interpolated point. And that's based on order of most precise and accurate to least precise and accurate. Although if we determine something is, we don't have any confidence in something, we won't ever return it to you in the first place. But that's the most important thing to be looking at. You know, especially when you're doing something like maybe you want to like trigger dispatch to an address. It could be important, for example, to say like, hey, if we're going to do this, we shouldn't have an interpolated result. We should only have a rooftop point or parcel, because those are the ones that we guarantee those are real deliverable addresses. There's a very small percentage of interpolated points that like there might not be a house built there yet. Like it's a lot that's a real address, but like there's actually nothing there. There's no delivery point there. And in that case, you'd want to like look again at that coordinate property, at the accuracy property, and say like, hey, if this is interpolated, we don't want to use it for that use case. Yeah.
Great. Okay, we've got a couple questions kind of about integrations with the wider Mapbox platform. So one is, you mentioned platform integrations. Can you tell me how Mapbox Geocoding integrates with maps or navigation? And then a sort of related one asking, can you tell me more about the mobile SDKs? Anything, Chris or Rob, you'd like to offer?
Yeah, so the first question is, they interoperate at the point of the data, right? So you can use geocoding completely on its own, and if you want to use it to map the results, you can, basically take back the like I showed in the demo, the response you get back from the geocoding API, it does have GeoJSON in it. So if you want to show a point location on a map, it's already in a format that's easily compatible with all Mapbox mapping solutions. And same thing for like directions API. It's a very common process for, allowing a user to search for a location, getting back the coordinates from that location from the geocoding API or the searchbox API, and then using those coordinates as a destination. So I might grab the coordinates of a user's phone as my origin, and then I might grab the coordinates from a geocode or a searchbox request as the destination. And now I have two sets of coordinates I can send to the directions API, and then navigate. And then all that time I'm making GPS traces. And then while I'm making those GPS traces, I can then use that GPS trace to call the map matching API, for example. So all of these things are all interoperable basically on the data level. And it's up to you, it's up to your integration to figure out how to move that data around and when to call these different services. Next one was about the SDKs. So I'd say the ones you're going to find with a quick search are called the Search SDK for iOS and the Search SDK for Android. And then there's also a library called Mapbox Search.js. All of these are optimized around the Searchbox API. So they, like I said earlier, kind of designed for an interactive experience in a front-end application. For the geocoding API, you might have to search a little bit farther. But we do have like a Swift wrapper, a Java wrapper, and a JavaScript package, and a Python package. I think there's even a Ruby one floating around, but I can't vouch for it. But mostly those are just wrappers. So they're just kind of an easier syntax of how to make these queries, and then they do the actual network traffic for you behind the scenes. But none of them are terribly complex. So as we saw, directly contacting the API with a fetch request in JavaScript is pretty easy to code. So a lot of times you may end up writing your own, writing your own little wrapper for it. But if the SDK helps you move faster, that's fine too.
Great. Thanks for that, Chris. Okay, we've got just two more questions and then we'll wrap up to stay on time. So we've got a question from Evelyn. Does Mapbox's geocoding service provide good coverage and accuracy for African countries?
That's a great question. So we have worldwide coverage when it comes to, like, for example, city level geocoding. And that includes Africa, where we're really strong and have great coverage of like all the addresses that are really precise. That's North America, Japan, all of Europe. And those are like where we have like our best coverage, in addition to, sorry, AU and New Zealand. Other places like South America, East Asia, parts of Africa will have some address coverage, but a lot of it is going to be place level coverage. There's two countries where we have very good coverage in Africa. One is South Africa and the other is Egypt. And there's a good amount of North African countries that are on our roadmap this year to add a lot of address coverage for. So anyways, the answer for a tracking purposes would be, if you need to track something in Africa on like a city and region level, yeah, no problem. If you need to track something at the like more very precise address level, it would be like South Africa and Egypt, is where I'm quite confident you'd have a good experience. And then North Africa will be improving Q3, Q4.
Great. Thanks, Rob. One more question before we wrap up. Does the API, geocoding API, I'm assuming, account for the mobile device's perceived location accuracy?
We don't do that today. But we have, yeah, we have some APIs like our map matching API that can like take coordinates that you send it and it'll kind of like snap them to a road, for example, if you want to like accurately track a route. That's an interesting question. Yeah, from the geocoding perspective, when we get a lat long, we assume that it's high quality and we'll just find the nearest address to that lat long. There's exceptions where like when we can clearly you're traveling along like a highway or freeway, we won't try to like reach out of the freeway and like find a house that's like to the freeway, but like not accessible there. In those cases, we'll just back like the highway name and location. But other than that, like we will treat the coordinates that you send us as like trustworthy, essentially.
All right. Great. Well, that concludes the time that we have available for today's webinar. Everyone will receive a recording of this if you want to rewatch any parts of it or share it with other folks on your team. Thank you all for joining us live. And we will be sharing that replay out on our webinar page on YouTube and via email to everyone who registered. And also, we would love to hear your feedback about today's session, what else you'd like to see in future sessions. You'll receive a short feedback survey via email for that. Great. Thanks to both of our presenters, Robert and Chris, and to everyone who joined. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.